Hello, welcome to this webinar on how to master the Google Admin Console. In this series, we help you cover certain areas within the Google Admin Console and give you information on how you can set it up for your school. In this particular webinar, we are going to cover how to deploy and manage Android apps extensions on your Chromebook. That will not cover everything that we're going to do, because I will also touch up on some other things, other apps that you may encounter within the Google Admin Console. So given that we have quite a lot of ground to cover, let me quickly show you my presentation. So this is the first session of our 10-part webinar series. If you haven't yet, you can always watch those back later on our YouTube channel, which is Cool International. You can find our channel there. But first off, let me start with making sure that everyone knows. Of course, keep your microphone muted. And if you have any questions, let me know in the chat. This is the general setup of the planning that I plan to go through. I'll try to keep the introduction brief so we can get into the details as soon as possible. As I said, this is part of our 10-part webinar series on the Google Admin Console, where we try within an hour to give you some insight and some experience that we have gathered over time on how we help schools in setting up and managing the Google Admin Console. This also gives you plenty of opportunity to ask questions on your specific situation, your own school setup, and we'd love to help you out with that, even if we can't manage that within the time of the webinar. Every single one will be centered around a certain theme. This one will be covering the specific apps or several apps and what we can do to manage those. Now today we manage the apps, and you can see here which ones we've already finished. The next one that we are going to organize will be starting, or will be set on September 2nd, and we'll cover how to set up and manage several types of devices like Apple, Android, and Windows devices. So do stay tuned for that one. And if you want to stay updated on future dates, also do check out our website, cool.cloudwise.com. All right. So let me first start out with introducing myself. Hi, my name is Leon. I work for the company Cloudwise, the creators of the Cool School platform. I work as a trainer and consultant. Personally, I have a technical background where I have helped schools implement IT, but I've grown more and more in a role of an advisor as a consultant to help schools see how they can benefit from using IT within education to make sure that IT just gets easier and that you can actually enhance the way that you teach using IT. Now, that is also the premise of what we try to do here at Cool. Here at Cool, we really try and think of how can we make IT easier? Why is it IT is so complicated? Because oftentimes we find that IT is not efficient or easy to use, and that it costs a lot of money, or seems to cost a lot of money, to really get the benefits from it. So we turn it around and ask ourselves that question: how can we make sure that something is efficient, easy to use, and it can be used without a lot of hassle and great expenses? And that is what we as Cool have been doing so far. We have helped a lot of schools over time on how they can use IT, implementing that within the classroom and giving training to staff and the directors and IT managers. We've done so for over 1,600 schools worldwide and have over 270,000 users. And most of them use our own platform called Cool. It is a platform that makes it very easy and accessible for your students to find all of their learning materials, but it also gives certain tools in the hands of your teachers to make digital teaching just a lot more easy. For instance, to make it easy for students to log in using pictures instead of passwords, but also to monitor students. For admins, the Cool Portal is very nice because it can help you provision your accounts from a source data set. For example, if you use a school information management system, Cool can make sure that we can provision accounts based on that system. we're very happy that our customers are happy with us. We're very happy to see that we have a very high score for our customer service. That's something that we're very proud of. And given the fact that we are having an international reach, we try and make sure that our customers are very happy with that. So to set the premise of why we started this webinar series in the first place, of course, there is COVID-19, and despite the fact that a lot of people are getting their vaccines and in a lot of places in the world, things are looking up, we found that in many countries, schools were closed down by governments due to lockdowns and trying to prevent the spread of the virus. And that came with certain challenges because suddenly um, there was a situation where um, the um, a lot of the teaching needed to be done remotely. And that came with a lot of challenges. Teachers needed to check what kind of tools they could use. Many of them were inexperienced with that, and therefore it became very challenging, especially if you did not have the infrastructure in place yet to enable distance learning, nor the expertise to do so. Let's see, I see a message in the chat. Yes, but you're right, David. This is indeed going to be about Google Workspace. It has not changed last minute. Thank you for tuning in. This is just an introduction. We are going to cover Google Workspace now because we are diving into the subject right now. If you have any questions, do write them down in the chat so that I can cover them in more detail. Because today we are covering how to manage apps within Google Workspace. Now, I'm going to go and dive in real quick. So I'm going to the admin dashboard, obviously, to start off with showing you a few things. Now, I will also make sure that I am not blocking anything, so I actually know where on the screen I am. There we go. Now, there we go. I see. No problem. I get that if the title changed a bit, because you are indeed right, there was a slight change in the title later, which I had to adapt to myself. So I get the confusion. Totally. Apps within Google Workspace can also be confusing, which is a nice bridge, I feel like. Why is it confusing? Well, if we get to our dashboard, we have apps. But if we go to apps on our main dashboard, then we get to the place where we find our Google Workspace core apps, some additional services, and the Google Workspace Marketplace apps. But you will find no Chrome apps, you will find no extensions, and you will find no Android applications here, because those are managed in a separate spot within the Google Admin Console, which is reserved for device management and Chrome management specifically. Under the Google Workspace button here, we find all the core services like Drive and Docs, Classroom, Gmail, etc. So the moment that we make use of this, we can go here and we can set specific rights for every service, essentially. So the moment that we check for the Google Workspace core apps, that really revolves around the specific types of apps that are probably used daily and that are included within the within the core of what Workspace has to offer. While additional services include all kinds of things that you could use as a consumer as well. So what we find here, for example, is indeed the Chrome Web Store. But we also find other, well, apps that you might use as a consumer, but less likely. And the reasons that they have been placed underneath additional services is due to the fact that they require different kinds of access to data, metadata, for example. So for that reason, we have certain things like Google Earth, for example, and Google Maps. Those apps collect metadata in a different way than the other services, and therefore it cannot cover those rights or those insights that they need to get the same way as those core apps. You'll also find, of course, that those apps that are viewed in this list are a lot less likely to be used on a daily basis either. But then what are Google Workspace Marketplace Apps? Well, Google Workspace Marketplace Apps are essentially, as it says here, third-party apps. Now, if we have certain functionality that we are currently lacking, let's, for example, say I wanted to make myself easy and create mind maps, but I want to do so within certain parts within Drive in this case, then I could search within the marketplace and add, in this case, mind map 2 for Google Drive, so that you could immediately create a new mind map based on this application that has been made by a third party. Now, by doing so, or trying to add a new app, we can add an app to the domain install list. If we go here, you will be able to find, of course, a plethora of different kinds of applications. So it might be good to see what it is that you want to add in this way. If I go and search for cool, for example, you will find a cool install application. Also, a specific application is required if you use our plagiarism system. But in the same fashion, I could search for, what's a good example? Let's see. Yeah, real merge. We could, in the same way, search for add-ons. Now, maybe you are familiar with that, but within the Google Workspace environment, Google Documents, spreadsheets, and quite a few more, as you can see here, what kind of apps it influences, you can add extra functionality in the way of adding add-ons. Now, add-ons, just like full applications, are third-party software. It might be very smart in that case to make sure that you stay in control as an admin of which add-ons and apps can be installed or which ones you enforce to be installed. I find Mailmerge to be a very good example of this, given the fact that especially people who send a lot of messages and used to do that using Outlook and Microsoft Excel, for example, find that suddenly that functionality is lacking somehow. And instead, we can search for a mail merge type of software, make sure that we can get our spreadsheet data set and generate a lot of documents or emails in such a way. So the same counts, for example, fonts. We have a set amount of fonts that are by default available within Google Documents, but perhaps we want to make sure that we have more fonts at our disposal. We can go to one of these add-ons or applications, and then I can say domain install or individual install. Now, this is important to know. If we pick domain install, this means that everyone at least will be able to install this add-on. It will be enforced installed in the entire domain if we click it here. Now, if I go to individual install, then instead I can continue because it will ask me to verify that it is me that is in here now. I can go and I can see what kind of access this application requires. And finally, I can click allow. It has now been done and has been set up just for myself. I have found that for users to go to the actual Google Workspace Marketplace is that's just difficult. I find that normal users, like a normal teacher, doesn't really bother with actually going to the Google Workspace Marketplace and in that way search for what they need. Instead, what I more often find is that they go to their application like Google Documents, and then in there they can go to add-ons, and in that way search the Google Workspace Marketplace, but only see the add-ons that are relevant for Google Docs. It's a small tip, but I find that yeah, many teachers find that at least a lot more accessible. But that being said, we can domain install certain things, and this is particularly useful if there are certain add-ons that we experience that almost everyone wants to use. Then it is just simply a matter of making sure that everyone has this at their disposal to make sure that, yeah, you don't have to individually set this up for your employees. But of course, in the same manner, if I go to the actual applications, because those are the kinds of things that are listed here, I can do it in the same fashion, as it were, as we can do with other applications or services. I can specify per organizational unit how I want to treat that. So in this case, it shows me if it is inherited, if it gets distributed, and what I want it to do. So in this case, if I go to MindMap and I click it, I can now see how the distribution is organized if I click here. Now it's set to on for everyone. Instead, what I could do is say, no, I go to District A, and I want to turn it off for specifically District A. So I override it now. All the schools that are organized under District A will not inherit the application and will not see it. Within the specific app, there are some small things that you could change. But mostly what we can see here is what kind of rights a certain application requires. And we could even, when we find that an application has more access than we want them to have or think they require, is to revoke the access, making sure that this application no longer can access our school domain's data. You find that some applications have external links to set up how it works. In our case, for example, to make sure that you can set up the cool portal. But in this case, if you have a license for MindMap, you can go to a specific user login page and set some things up for your preferences for MindMap. And that is essentially what you do with the Google Workspace Marketplace apps. It's a place where you go to when you want to add more functionality on top of what is currently already offered within the Google Workspace environment and the core Google apps. So in terms of add-ons or any other functionality that has to do specifically with the entire Google Workspace environment. And that last bit is really important to really tell the difference between those other apps, because now I'm obviously going and hop over to the other overview. So I'll go back to the main Google admin display, and I'll go switch to the other side now and to devices. Now, with devices, some of you may have watched the previous webinar as well, because I see Faisal is back again. Very good. But I find that this page is already a bit confusing because we always need to first go to Chrome, and then we have the options that we probably have to set for, well, just about any time that we actually go to devices and need to set any settings. We probably do it for Chrome. And here we see listed apps and extensions, and then users and browsers, kiosks, and managed guest sessions. Now, in the last webinar, I already talked about different ways that you can manage Chrome. So the differences between users and browsers, kiosks, and managed guest sessions, and of course, just device settings. Now, I will go to users and browsers because I think that is still the easiest way to start off. With users and browsers here, we have a big list of all kinds of things that we've already added to our demo domain. As you can imagine, that it has really exploded. So I can now go to District A and click it, and I see everything that is currently set up. There are multiple things that I want to talk about, but I'll first just go into how can I add a new application. Just start with the basics. We have a icon to the right. And if I click it, we have several options. We can go to the Chrome Web Store. We can go to the Google Play Store. We can see if we can add an app or extension based on an ID. And finally, we can add it based on a URL. The last two, I presume you will not use unless a external party or someone you collaborate with actually shares that with you. So I find that admins can just forget about it, because by the time you really need to use that, I'm sure someone will tell you, or they'll hopefully they will hand you a manual, a guide to follow. So really the only two interesting things are the Chrome Web Store and the Google Play Store. The Chrome Web Store and the Play Store are different because the Play Store has Android applications in them, and the Chrome Web Store is filled with Chrome applications or extensions. What's the difference? Well, if you have an Android phone, then you are probably quite familiar with the Google Play Store. It is a large collection of all kinds of Android apps we can install. These are usually standalone applications, things you can really use on your device without the need for anything else. So it really stands on its own. For example, if you would really want, you could install the mobile version of Microsoft Word, for example, on a device with the Android app. Or maybe you want to use extra functionality, such as with Classroom, to annotate on a PDF file. Sure, then we install the Classroom Android application instead of them going to the web browser. In a like-minded fashion, there are, of course, a lot of applications that run only as an Android app, and we can add them and manage them here in the admin console. The things that we can add through the Chrome Web Store are mostly extensions, or they are Chrome apps, but more likely you'll use it for extensions. An extension is not so much a standalone app as it is something that enhances your browser. So for example, I think Read and Write is a very good example. Read and Write is a piece of software that makes sure that you can have your screen, your web page that you currently have opened, be reopened. No, not reopened, be translated to speech. So it's a text-to-speech kind of software, but it also helps you to mark certain parts of what is being spoken. And I've seen it being used along a lot of schools who have extra help for children with dyslexia, for example. I myself am dyslexic. I did have reading software, but it was quite different, and I had to really work around how to use that. So having an extension is really nice. And what is an extension? Well, to the top right of our to the right of our address bar, we just have our extensions. Now here's just a cool extension, very small, very tiny. And we can click here to see what other kinds of extensions we may have already installed. The pinning really is only there so that we can add it to this bar so it always stays visible. So I hope that kind of makes it clear what the difference is between a Chrome app or extension and the Android applications. Also, an important thing to note is that if we add Chrome extensions instead of an Android application, those, of course, can be used device independently as long as we have the Chrome browser. Because when we log in and we make sure that we have synced up our details, it will automatically get both all your the rights that you set for the services you use, but it will also load your bookmarks, your history, passwords, and of course, your extensions. That makes it very nice to use in different situations. While Android applications need to be installed on the device when we log into them. Now, Android applications can be used on Chromebooks, but you would have to see when the Chromebook was made, whether or not it is compatible with Android. I will post the link to a page where you can check the certain Chromebook types that have been verified after 2019 that were Google Play enabled. So you could indeed use the Google Play Store. So you can check that out later to make sure that your Chromebooks are Google Play ready if you haven't checked that already. So that's a lot of talking. Let's just show you how that works. So we're going to add a Chrome app or extension. We can specify what kind of thing we are searching for, and we can even see that we can search for games. Well, maybe we don't want that. But let's start off with just an extension. Let's go for something, a productivity tool. Now, what's a good productivity tool? Grammarly can be really nice, especially for someone like me. But maybe I find it very useful to run a quick speed test. I can just click it, I can select it, and what it then does is add it as one of the extensions for this organization that in this case is automatically set to allow install. Now, currently, it also opens a small page where we can set certain details, which is usually only relevant for very specific applications. So for now, I will leave this for what it is. But it is now set to allow install. And if I click it, you find that I have a few options, like I can block it, I can force install, and I can force install and pin it. Now, if I force install it, that means that it will automatically be loaded every single time that a user within this organization logs in. So they don't have to do anything, it will just show up. Force install and pinning it means that it will be visible like I have with our cool extension, making sure that it is visible next to your address bar. And if we set it to block instead, this means that it cannot be installed. The reason why that is useful is when we go back to the general settings in this overview. Because what we see here is that before it starts off with the list of all those applications is allow users to install other apps and extensions. Now, if we keep it as default, it says allow apps and extensions for Chrome Web Store only. And we can change this to block all other apps and extensions. The reason why you can block an application is because you can say, I really don't want them to install this application. Instead, you do keep the web store completely open, the Chrome App Store completely open for your teachers and your students, for example, so they can just search for whatever they want to use, and makes it a lot more flexible and makes sure that you are not constantly busy with adding new applications in this overview and in this list. But I also have seen schools who do it the other way around. They prefer to stay in control more compared to, how do you say that? Instead of giving more freedom, and that they rather have teachers run into the problem that they want to use a certain application, but it's not available yet, and that then they have to approach an IT manager to set this up. Now, this has been done for users in browsers. I can also go to Android applications for Google Play. This is something that also you'll probably be familiar with if you have an Android phone, as I said before. But let's say I want to go for the Google Chrome productivity app. Now, in this case, it has been approved, but there are new permissions that are requested. So I would have to go and select it and see what kind of permissions are added to see what it tries to, what it tries to send or tries to collect. In the same manner, if I go and search for a new application, it is really important to go and see what kind of rights does this application require. Now, if we go to Duolingo, for example, an application that allows you to learn a new language, it's a free application by default. Then if I go and select it, it will, and I saw that it was already allowed, but I can go and see what kind of new requests for access have been made. In this case, I go here, I click accept, and this has now been updated. Now, instead, I can immediately go and view the app details when I have it selected and click on this button. What it then shows is what is shown here in the Google Play Store. If I go and select it again, I get back to this overview. Now, interestingly enough, with Android applications, this part of adding them is exactly the same. We go through that step of searching the application. I add it. I see what kind of permissions it needs. I need to grant those permissions. And then it shows up in my overview. And I can set what kind of Yeah, install options I allow or prohibit. Now, of course, this is something that you can do on organization level, but so far I think that is quite logical. Then let us go to kiosks then instead. So I find that kiosk apps can be quite useful, but people tend to not know what's possible with a kiosk app. The big difference with a kiosk app compared with a normal application is that we have the ability to make sure that before you even log into your Chromebook, you can make sure that certain apps are available. What is very useful about that is the fact that we can make sure that even without a student logging in, they have certain apps that they can start. And if you have certain applications that don't require you to make sure that how do you say that, that doesn't require a user to be logged in, for example, just runs standalone, then that is perfect. Because within that kiosk application, you don't have anything else that distracts you. Your students might otherwise be easily distracted with internet, for example. If you just start a kiosk app, the only thing that opens is that one application, and you would really need to restart the device to make sure that you can get back to your normal login screen. This works exactly the same way as adding normal Chrome apps or Google Play apps. One thing, however, to keep in mind is that certain apps are not available yet, or just not available, period, as a um, kiosk app. So you'll find that as well. If I go here and, for example, I want to add WhatsApp messaging as a kiosk app, I can select it. I'm curious if it will say with this one. It says that I can actually add it as a kiosk app. That's, to me, absolutely hilarious. I never tried that before. Let's see if there's another one, because I think there was a Mindstorms example. Yeah. Oh, forms. See if it's this one. I think this one. Yeah. I go and add a version of Lego Mindstorms. I can check this out now. If this is what I need. In this case, it is the Android application. I allow it. It is added. Very good. Now, if I instead do this with a Chrome web app, and I do the same thing, so for example, indeed, the Mindstorms again, boom, then we see this selected app is not enabled for kiosk. I'll try it again. You see that the message pops up. We cannot actually add this one to the kiosk options. So you will have to keep in mind that certain things cannot be made available in that same way for every type of application. But using kiosk in that manner is just really useful to make sure that if you want your students to not be required to log themselves in, to yeah, just make sure that they can use that application to start off and just immediately start working without having to work around the hassle of them logging in with their personal account. Um, Another example of that is, for example, using Scratch. Scratch is an application for primary schools. It's a way to really program with blocks, if you're familiar. Now, you don't have to be logged in to Scratch to start using the application. So it is a lot easier to just grab the Chromebook, open it, start the Scratch application, and then just go and do your thing with your school and your classroom. Finally, we of course have managed guest sessions left. And the managed guest sessions currently has no applications added, but you only do that when you have a setting where you allow your devices to be used in a guest mode or in a more public mode. The public mode doesn't require an account to be signed in, but you can put some restrictions on it, which is nice, of course. And if certain apps need to be made available when you go and use that, then this is very useful. Then you just make sure that you add them here and set them, of course, for the right organizational unit and make sure in that way that even in the guest sessions, an application is available. The guest sessions and kiosk options are set on device level. Do keep that in mind. It's really important. Kiosk managed guest sessions are done on the device level. So any of these apps that I add, I have to make sure that I go to the devices organizational unit and set the policies there. Because users and browsers, that is for literally users and browsers. So if I want to set certain applications for my students, or I want to block certain applications, then I can do that on that level. My advice will always be to try and see what is actually the easiest way to manage your entire admin environment. And as I have spoken about that previously, both in videos and in the webinars, is that the organizational unit structure is just really important to make sure that you just make things easy for yourself as an admin. As an example, if I add everything on the root level, in this case edu.cloudwise.nl, this will make sure that every single organizational unit by default gets every single application that I add in this list. This can be useful, but by default it will inherit, every sublevel will inherit those settings. So on one hand, it's nice because it's really easy to add something and everyone gets it. But that's at the same time the downside. You set it up here and everyone gets the application. Um, and I find that you would want to look per school location, or maybe in this case within a whole district, how you would go about this. How do you want to manage this for your schools, for your students, your employees, your devices? Because really, how you set this up can make a big difference for how easy it is for you to manage. And specifically, on the long run, you really want to make it easy for yourself and just keep a good overview. The apps and extensions, as I've shown it so far, is in essence just really this. If I click a different one, for example, this one, there's almost no information. I can see here that I can check what kind of permissions it uses. And you see here that I can include it in the Chrome Web Store collection. If I do not allow other apps and extensions of the Chrome Web Store, then that will mean that the students and teachers or employees will not be able to go and use the Chrome Web Store except for the things that we already set up or have approved to be added to your own personal web store, which is only filled with the handful of apps probably that you intend to use. You see, we can only do that for Chrome Web Store. So if you have already used the Google Play options with your school, you will have encountered that you actually don't by default see any applications within the Play Store, even if you have the service enabled. Service enabled, yeah, don't worry, I'll get to that in a bit if that hasn't happened yet. But the important thing to know is that you cannot actually have it set completely open. You cannot have a completely open Google Play environment for your school. All you can do for Google Play, so for Android applications, is simply just to add them and approve of them. Approving meaning we allow them to be installed. So if I go for BBC, yeah, BBC, oh, BBC, BBC News, and I select it, then I get some permissions I need to give. Very good, accept, and then allowing install will make sure it pops up in your school's Google Play store. Now, if you want to get started using Google Play and you haven't already with your Chromebooks, I'm going to show you what you need to turn on, or at least check within your environment to make sure that you have it set up properly. So first off, of course, we have to check whether or not we can already add Android applications. If we go to our start screen, so the basic dashboard of the admin console, and we go to apps once more, Then we go to additional Google services. Now, the Google services, like I mentioned before, these you don't have to check very often, but it is in this list that if I scroll down, it's quite an elaborate list, we find the Google Play service. Now, simply clicking it only reveals that we can turn it on or off for certain organizational units. So in this case, if I really want to add it, I can go to District A. I can say I want the service to be turned on, or to District B, I want it to set to off instead, so that District B does not use Android applications. Besides setting up the service this way, it's also really important to make sure that you check your Chrome devices. Now, of course, it is something that you could quite easily just check on the web page that I am planning to share. I'll share it now. Let's see. Yeah, I have it here. And I'll post it in the chat. All right. Because on that page, you will find that there is a very long list essentially of all kinds of Chromebook types per manufacturer to check whether or not they have been approved for the use of Google Play, which is very good because especially if you have been using Chromebooks for a very long time, it's good to check which ones you could keep for the use of certain Google Play apps. Now, if I go back again to the admin, go to apps and Google Workspace Marketplace Apps. Here, I started off with this, but here we can add all kinds of functionality from third parties to make sure you add more functionality to your environment. It's even more important to check with these applications what kind of permissions they require. Why is that so important? In comparison, the other applications check details of the account. So they check the user account's details and what kind of permissions they have on that or on that device. While rather, these kinds of applications check certain applications' permissions that immediately influence your entire Google Workspace environment. I'm not saying that to deter you to completely ignore Google Workspace Marketplace apps, because many of them are really useful, and I would highly recommend installing certain add-ons, for example. But it is, as an admin, very important to keep in mind whether or not there are certain things that you allow to be used, or whether or not you want to add them domain-wide. So if we go to the Google Marketplace allow list, yes, allow users to install any app from the Google Workspace Marketplace, manage access. This means that now I would have to change underneath apps, Google Workspace Marketplace settings, that I don't want my users to be able to have access to all add-ons and all applications. Now, I personally find it very useful and easy that I can just look for an add-on that I would like to use. But the difficult thing is that I know what to look out for when I search for an add-on. Of course, I am very critical on what kind of application requires what kind of permissions and access. While a teacher whose main focus is teaching, not IT, will probably either not know whether or not it is right, and then we have 50% chance of what happens. Either they just allow their permissions, or they ignore it, or maybe they don't do it. Hopefully, approach an administrator. So there is an argument to be had for making sure that only you have access to the Google Workspace Marketplace, and that you manage a list of apps that are allowed for your employees or your students to install from that marketplace, so that you can go through it. You can see what applications are safe, which ones make sense in terms of what kind of permissions they require, and then they still have the freedom to install them, but only based on what you have already added to a whitelist. If you wonder how apps are managed for a user, that is a bit different. So if I go to Steve, for example, now Steve has certain groups that he's a part of, but we can see here whether or not he has access to certain apps, but you will find only the services and marketplace apps. So here we do not see whether or not we have certain extensions pushed or Android applications that we add for Steve when he logs into a Chrome device. No, instead what we can do here is go and turn certain things off from the marketplace or from the services that he uses. The good thing about this is that we can always check whether or not, for example, Steve is allowed to go and visit the Google Play Store, because I can go through this list and I can now see, oh, no, Google Play. Oh, this is Google Pay. Haha. See, my dyslexia is playing up. Google Play is set to on. So when Steve logs in, you should be able to have access to Google Play. And it means that you probably will need to help him out why certain things didn't work out the way that he intended and he couldn't install his apps. So that is a broad overview of managing apps within your Google Workspace environment in the admin console. If you have any more questions, do let me know in the chat. But for now, of course, I am going to help you out with how you can stay cool. Out here, it has already really started to turn up the heat really early for summertime. But what we can do for you in general is provide Google Workspace advice and insight. So if there are any challenges that you struggle with, do please reach out to us. We'd love to help you. But you can also have access to our learning platform, our all-in-one learning platform called Cool, which is free to use. The moment that you go to the Google Workspace Marketplace, you can find Cool and you can run through our wizard to set up your own Cool portal. If you want to use all of the functionality School has to offer, you can do so, because there are a lot of things that we include within the portal. Easy ways to log in, for example, for your students, either with a QR code or with pictures. Teachers are able to monitor student activity and start an exam app. We have a way for students to showcase their achievements in a cool portfolio. But for the more technical aspect, we have certain single sign-on capabilities and can provision to the Google environment, have a Google Classroom integration by connecting with your student information system, making it really easy for you because you don't have to really keep that in mind and create users manually. The base of the platform is free, and if you subscribe or at least fill in our form for the Distance Learning Toolkit, you'll get access to our manuals, previous webinars that we have given on certain topics, but also free online training on distance learning for your school. And you can try out all of the functionalities that you just saw for 90 days for free. So you can really try and see if it is something that helps your school and empowers your teachers to make it easier to teach digitally. So I will make sure that I paste the link in the chat so you can find it there. And that is so far the end of the webinar. I'm very curious to hear if we can help you out in any way or form. Do reach out to us for specific questions about Cool itself. We have our support desk. If you want personal advice based on certain challenges that you're facing, you can always contact us. We'd love to help you out. So that is the end of the webinar. Thank you so much for tuning in, and hopefully I'll see you in the future.